Now,
Okay, both your PCs are now muted.
Does that work?
Yep, there you go.
Oh my gosh, technology.
and when you've got the tech person who's that text, I'm so sorry, Barbara.
So we're going to talk a little bit about succession planning, legacy planning, and some alternatives and so forth. The idea of succession planning and legacy planning is to start it as soon as you can. I'm not saying you won't change your mind. I'm just saying that you want to start, you want to know where you're going to go. And if you know where you're headed, that you want to get out in 5 years, then you know what you want to do. Or I want to own this thing and run it for 15 years, and then I'm going to transfer it to my kids. Then you know what you want to do. Things may change. You may want to sell it to a third party. You may want to sell it to employees. You may want to just shut it down and walk away. But any of those are, that way you know where you're headed. And that's the idea. How long does this stuff take? It can happen like that. It can happen really quickly. I know where I want to do. I'm on my way out the door. Something came up and it's my chance to get out. That may happen. However, usually it takes, even if you found you were going to sell it to the outside world and you found a buyer, it's probably 6 to 12 months to get out. If you're selling to employees or family members, you got to make sure they have the plan in place, that they have the skills, that they know what they want to do. If you're going to just liquidate and walk away, you can do that anytime, but there are probably times when it's easier than others. So that's some of the pieces I want to mention. Deborah, did you have some questions you wanted to ask?
Can you maybe tell me a little bit more about like questions people should be asking or things they should be thinking about for each exit strategy?
Okay.
And I do have a quick question at some point. I'm not sure if we can
Sure.
interject or if there's going to be time towards the end, but my question predominantly is regarding trusts. So kind of putting LLCs or businesses in a trust and for, as part of the succession planning. So, great about selling it, but if I wanted a little bit more protection and kind of controlling it beyond the grave, so to speak, particularly if it's being passed to family.
Okay.
If we can discuss some of that too.
Sure. So if you were planning to pass it to family, let me start there. Somebody's got 3 children and there's only one who's in the business. So you figure out that one and that's the plan to get it to that person. If you did that, then you'd say, okay, 1, does that person really want the business? Because sometimes kids are in the business just because you are.
Sure.
2, do they have the skills? And if they don't have the skills, can you help them create the skills? Can you help them learn? 3, you have to understand your kids are not you and they won't think that way. So you have to let them do things their way to some degree. And then normally you've got 3 kids and the business is going to go to one of them. How do you make it fair? Now, I'm not saying everything has to be equal between the kids. And if one child is actually going to buy it, then the money is there for it. But how is it how do you make it fair? Whatever fair means to you. And for a family situation, you probably want to talk to the other children and explain what's going on and not just leave them high and dry. If you were selling it to some employees, again, which employees? Which ones would you pick? Because it doesn't have to be all of them. I was in a room once with a bunch of employees, all of whom were planning to become the business owners. And one of the questions I asked is, I asked the business owner, do you guarantee the lease or do you guarantee the company debt? And the answer was, of course, Yeah, of course I do. And I said, for the people who are joining as employees, if they're going to be owners, they have to understand that being ownership is not all roses and great money. It is sometimes things are bad and you don't get a paycheck, even though everybody else gets a paycheck, and you probably have to guarantee the debt. And one of the guys said, my wife would kill me. And that was the end of it for that person, but the rest of them went on. It's also, do they have the skills? How does it work? Do they like each other? Because you wouldn't want to put a bunch of employees together and say, you guys are going to be the future, and it doesn't work. Now, understand, as a business owner, you can't make that relationship work. It's not possible. If it's your kids, you can't make it, and it's 3 kids who are going to run the business. You can't force them to agree. Yes, Melina, we're going to come back to the concept of controlling from the grave too. Don't forget, haven't forgotten. And then again, the employees are not you. They're not going to do it your way. Sometimes employees will leave. Sometimes family members will say, I don't want to do this anymore. And how do you cope with the fact that somebody left? And if they're already an owner, by the way, there's a buzz in the background. We don't know why. We're sorry. So that's some of the things. If you were going to transfer it to a third party, you might, I'm sorry, for families and employees, it's probably a long-term transition to get out, for the business owner to get out. It doesn't happen quickly because they have to figure some things out. And probably the business owner controls it for quite some time, maybe years into the future. If you were transferring it to a third party, you would look at it and say, okay, the third party is going to buy it. I can just sell it and walk away. And maybe you can. But if you sell it and walk away and the business was to some degree dependent on you, that means that that person, that they aren't going to pay you as much. Or maybe they aren't even interested in buying it if you're not going to stick around for maybe a few years. You know, a short-term transition is one thing, 3 months. But if you have to stick around for 3 to 5 years and you're not in control of the company anymore, many business owners don't cope with that very well. I'll just say that. Often for a transfer to a third party, you have to think about what kind of promises do they want from you. They make you give them representations in writing that says the financial statements are true. There isn't any environmental problems. There aren't any liabilities. There aren't any bad things that they're going to inherit. And if something comes up, they want money from you. Probably your employees and your family members don't go down that road. Okay. Another thing to think about on all of these is the tax hit, because you can't just sell a company and not have a tax hit, or at least not take into account, you have to take into account taxes. If you're thinking, and you can add zeros or subtract zeros here, but if the company is worth $1 million and you sell it for $1 million and you think that's great, that's what I need to make my life good going forward, that's fine. But if the tax hit is $300,000, you don't have $1 million, you've got $700,000. Ask CPAs to help you, ask tax lawyers to help you to figure out what the tax hit will be. And it's very dependent on the structure. If you're selling stock of a corporation, that's very different from selling assets. If you're an S Corp, it may be different than if you're a C Corp. If you're an LLC, tax of the partnership, that might be very different too. So you need to figure out what all those things are and come into play. Melina, you asked about how to control from the grave, in essence, and trust.
Sure, and obviously it has to do with taxes too. So that's a reason that, you know, instead of it being sold to anyone, simply, you know, kind of having a little bit more structured, and for references, it is an LLC filing as an S Corp.
Okay, if you have an LLC filing as an S Corp, it can be owned by your trust. And it could be a revocable trust. Then when you die, your trust continues, and the owners of the trust, the beneficiaries of the trust are probably family members. Yes, you can put provisions into the trust that say, this is what we're gonna do. This is how we're gonna run it. That works for a while, but I will tell you that in the end, it gets really hard to control from the grave.
Sure.
You know, you think your kids get along well, but maybe they don't. Maybe things change. I was just talking to somebody, he said, you know, one of the children got on drugs. One of the in-laws, one of the spouses got Alzheimer's, and all these things change. So you just have to be planning for what change might happen. And if you're going to have more than one owner, either now or in the future, you probably want some kind of a buy-sell agreement that says, what happens if one of the owners dies? What happens if they become disabled? What happens if they quit? What happens if they are fired? And can they be fired? All these questions come up. When you have people trying to buy the company, they got to find financing. And if you're going to go through the SBA, you have to understand the SBA changes their rules from time to time, as does any lender, but the SBA has. And sometimes they don't want to finance if the company has recently done an ownership transition of some sort. That's something to worry about.
Would that be an ownership transition though, if it's owned from the trust? And it obviously the trust would be while I'm still living, and just so you know, I'm in my 30s, late 30s, but I'm I'm not, you know, like older. I'm just kind of thinking ahead and trying to protect futures for family enterprise. Obviously, in cases of divorces or anything like that, I wouldn't want it to go to someone that shouldn't, like, you know, an ex-husband or God
Right.
forbid. You never know. So
Right. That's a legacy issue as well.
correct.
Whether it's a transfer of ownership depends on the language of the contract. And I was just going to say, you need to look at not just your financing contracts, that's one, but you look at your leases, you look at your contracts with vendors, you look at your contracts with customers, and you see what the assignment language says. Because if the assignment language says a change in ownership by more than 25% is a transfer, and you can't transfer this contract, then you have to go get permission from those people to transfer. It's another piece of succession planning. So it depends
Gotcha.
on what it says. And it may be directly or indirectly, which might come into play here for you. Do you have another question I should answer before I just keep blithering?
The caterer even today, shout out to Music City Hot Chicken, was talking about how he also owns his business with his brother. And he was curious about employee ownership. So if you were to give advice to people who are employee ownership curious, what would be your top level advice for process? And you gave some good stuff already, but anything to add to that?
So one type of employee ownership is truly an ESOP, employee stock ownership plan. That is a very formal plan. It's a retirement plan. You have to follow all the retirement plan rules, and most small businesses, even most medium-sized businesses, don't qualify, or it's just not worth it for them. So I'm not going to talk about that, but actual employee ownership is, I've got my business, and he and his brother own the business, and they've got 3 employees who are kind of their key players. They may not be the top paid, they might be the assistant who's been around forever and really thinks it's wonderful and wants to be part of the action. They've got the warehouse manager, they've got the sales manager or the salesperson, and they all want to become owners. So the idea is to sit down and figure out a plan that you think would work for you, the business owner, and then present it to the employees and say, this is what I'm thinking, before you start drafting documents, because it's just a lot of work to draft those documents. It's work and money, and it may not work. Again, they have to like each other and want to be in business together, because long-term, that's your play, is I will get out, they will be in the business together. It might also be something where it's a slow transition. The business owner might say, I'm going to sell 5% to each one of these 3 people. That means the business owner is still 85% in control. So in the end, they're still in control. They're just giving up a piece of the action. And then 2 years later, they might say, okay, we're going to do 5% more to each one of you. So now it's a 70-30 deal. And 5 years later, or 2 years later, it could be, I'm going to sell you another 5%. And now it's a 55-45 deal. Owner is still in control. And then the owner says, okay, I'm going to sell down to 20%. You guys are going to own 80% as a group. At that point, the owner probably has given up some control because they've been paid. They might still get to seat on the board of directors. They might still get some kind of a compensation because they're working. But there's a lot of different ways you can structure this. You can also put together a board, and that doesn't matter what kind of an entity this is, but you can put together a board where, yes, the person gets to sit on the board. They might even get to vote, but other people have more than 1 vote per person. So normally directors get 1 vote each. This way, you just change it by contract and say, no, Director A gets 3 votes, Director B gets 2 votes, and Director C gets 1 vote. So Director C is never really going to control anything, but it's important culturally and probably from the standpoint of them learning how to do it, to have them on the board and thinking about the future and what's going to happen and being part of the planning team, part of the strategic team. Does that help? Okay.
Very cool.
Dan, did you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Are you, Dan, are you in on the owner?
My wife and I.
Your
So,
wife? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about a little bit is buy-sell agreements between 2 owners. So these 2 people who own it together, he and his brother, they would want to have a buy-sell agreement, hopefully, between them, just in case one of them dies or can't do it anymore, or they just don't get along, because sometimes that happens.
Right.
When it's a husband and wife, I stay out of those relationships. I don't do buy-sell agreements typically between husbands and wives. I just don't, I think it's not worth it. There's too many other issues. Yeah.
And the operations agreement is where we outline what happens if something happens to one or the other,
Right.
or if we grow apart and separate or anything like that. We got that all outlined.
Yeah, good. And it's hard. When people are forming companies, it's probably, if you have to decide where to spend money, it's probably easier to say, look, we're going to spend money on a very short operating agreement that discusses governance and voting and so forth. But if we have to spend money, we're going to spend money on the buy-sell agreement rather than, the what happens if document.
Yeah.
And even between siblings, Melina, it might be really important. I've got one going right now where they have a plan for children owning. Mom and dad are going to slowly exit the business, and eventually when they die, they're going to be gone and the kids are going to own it. And there's nothing that says, how do they get out of this? And if you don't set it up, at least give some thought to it and say, oh, that we don't want them to get out of it. We want them to stick together. That's fine. Just understand that Thanksgiving dinner can be tough.
Understood.
Yeah. I think that in some ways there should be how do we get out of this without getting in a big fight? There should be a business divorce provision of some sort. But not everybody likes that idea, and it's what works for you. There is no right and wrong in any of this. None. Some people want a legacy for their business. They want to have the name go on and the family go on and the employees go on and things working well. And all that's great. Just understand that you can only control so much. And it's tough. It is tough.
Would trust be the best way to set it up, in your opinion, or are there any other ways?
You can
that
have
could be
direct
more
ownership.
beneficial?
You can have direct ownership. A trust means that you've said, these people are the beneficiaries. This is how it's going to run. This is who the trustee is. And it might work really well. You can also just have them have direct ownership in the LLC when you die, and have some rules about the LLC and how it works. I think the trust is probably I think many people think they put a lot of things into trusts, and it works well in some circumstances, but there are times when that's not the way to go. But if you like them, that's great. Again, it's what works for you.
Got it.
I wish I could give you a yes or
You
no.
know, yeah, no, definitely. And kind of, I don't want somebody to get hit with a huge tax when ownership is moved from one person to the other at time of death, and
Right,
having to change ownership at this time. Like, I'd rather do it all at once and prepare for it as best as I can versus down the road having to fire somebody. I just kind of feel like the trust gives you a little bit more protection in the provisions that you put in. There's a little bit more controlled, and it allows for ideally less room for costly mistakes.
yes.
But maybe that's not the case either. So
It might,
I
it
don't
just,
know.
the other thing that you don't get out of that is, when you do pay the taxes, what happens is you get a step-up basis. I paid for this. Yes, the
Right.
seller had to pay taxes, but now I own it, and I get a basis in my equity that is what I paid for it. And then so forth. If you don't ever do that, eventually when this company shuts down or whatever, that there is tax hit, and it's going to be pretty big. Understand that when you sell a company, there is book value, which is assets minus liabilities, and there's goodwill. Goodwill is not something that has a basis typically, unless you bought a company with goodwill. But the goodwill you built, the goodwill in your business, Dan, of the gaming and the people coming to the place and loving it, and maybe having multiple locations, that goodwill the value can come into play and be fairly strong in that goodwill, and then you're going to have to pay taxes at that point. Now, admittedly, when somebody dies and they pass it along, maybe there's no tax because the tax laws for estate planning say there's no tax, but eventually just plan on some taxes somewhere along the way. And once again, another nice little buzz came back.
And do we get a 5-minute warning?
It is 12:53, so it's time.
We got a couple minutes, yeah,
Yeah.
a minute or two.
So,
Closing advice.
think ahead about what you want to do, but where you want to go with this. Understand that if the business is all about you and it relies on you, and you can't take a 2-week vacation without calling in and running things, then the business isn't worth as much. Both the fact that you're going to have to be there every day while you're running it, but when you go to sell it or transfer it, it's not going to be worth as much. But find a path that you think sounds good to you. You might have 2 of them as an alternative. Don't have 10. And you decide, okay, this is the path I want to go down, and I'm going to aim for that. My strategic plan is going to be for that. If I'm going to sell it to the family, and the family's going to run it, fine, then we have to make sure the family wants to run it and that they have the skills. So I've got to train them. If it's going to be employees, I got to find the right employees, and I've got to train them. Sorry, that was my alarm saying we're done. And then keep an eye on it and revisit this plan. Don't just make a plan and shove it in a drawer and never look at it again. At least, every year or 2, pull out the plan, say, is this still going to work? And if it is, great, let's change some things, tweak it here. If it's not going to work, let's try something else. But it's got to fit you, and it's got to fit your goal and your family and your plans and goals for you and the business. So that's what it is. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here with us today and providing this overall guidance.
It was lots of fun. Hope you got something out of it, Dan and Milena.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yes, for sure. What, last question, one more.
Sure.
Where would you direct people like for resources on it? Would you say make sure you call a lawyer, talk to a lawyer? Are there
There are consultants who help in this. There are lawyers who help in this. There are CPAs who help in this. You can do a lot of reading and find, what people say on the internet, understanding
Mhm.
that the internet may not be correct.
Well,
But
it may not apply to your situation.
and it may not apply to your
Mhm.
situation, but just do some digging and see what people say. It doesn't have to be a $10,000 process to do this with a lawyer. It can be, let's have a meeting and talk about it for an hour or two, and then I'm going to go off and think and make some decisions. Yes, if you're going to think about taxes, you want some general tax ideas, but I wouldn't necessarily have somebody run my tax hit right away. I just want to know generally what it's going to cost. So I'm not surprised and I don't just think I can get away with no taxes. So, but I think you can do some planning and then you revisit it once a year and decide, oh, that didn't work. Ooh, that employee. And Thanksgiving dinner, that kid just really ticked me off. So I'm not going to go them. They didn't get along. They decided to have a fight again at Christmas. I don't know, something like that.
oh, it looks like we're gonna get brought back to the main room.
Okay.
There we go.
See you
Okay.
back there.
All
See
right.
back there.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do I hit this little button?
Yeah.
That being said, I am closing. Teresa's coming back on.
Thank you. Is everybody back together? Yes, can you hear me?
25 seconds.
Oh, 25 seconds? Okay, we're gonna give it a few more seconds for the other breakout rooms to close, but that was, oh yeah, it's up there on the, up there. Thank you so much for presenting that today. I love this boost, by the way. I work with Jay Fallon at Burgers. So I've heard just really good things about this boost. So thank you for being here today. Okay. Are we all together now? We're good to go? Okay. Everyone can hear me okay? Okay. Well, thank you back. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for participating. Welcome back. We're going to close in our breakout sessions just for the keys of logistics here. First, for the people joining us via Zoom, we just put in the chat the link to our event survey. And for everybody here in the physical space, you have a survey in your packet, or you can use that QR code as well. We really appreciate all of your feedback to help us provide and improve our future programming. So please take 2 minutes to fill that out and share your input. And also, if you found value in today's event, we hope you consider making a donation to support the Lunch and Learn series. There have been 10 of these over the course of the past several months, taking a lot of work and energy and effort. So we appreciate any kind of donation that you could. And you'll also find information on how to donate in your packet as well. And we want to take a minute to encourage you to review the resources that are included in the packets, as well as in the online resource library. And you'll receive an email after today with information on all of the tracks. And if you did not register on Eventbrite, you'll want access to the recording from the session and the compilation of resources for this and other events. Please make sure you signed up on the sign-in sheets we've passed around. All right, for those of you joining us in person, we invite you to stay to come back to our main space at the community event space where we are right here with the startup group and network and eat more food. Please use the next half hour to get your individual questions answered or just to network with the people you are. For those of you joining virtually, thank you for being here with us today and participating in this way. Thank you again. We hope you got some really good nuggets from today and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.